Okay, hello. Welcome. Before we get started on this episode, we have a couple news things, I guess. So, first of all, thank you so much. We had a lot of people enjoy our first episode, our little trailer introduction episode, so we really appreciated that and hearing from you all on Twitter. We got some cover art, which is really exciting. I'm not sure how to say they're at, but if you go to our Twitter, it is there. They're in our bio. We have credited them for their art. So thank you so much. Shelby has some news that was sort of going around a lot on Paper Girls Twitter yesterday. So we're going to start with just a little bit of news from Shelby.
Yeah, so before we get started, I just wanted to briefly discuss all of the new information we got from the Cliff interview yesterday. First, I wanted to give a shout out to everyone at the Big Gay Energy Pod for doing such a wonderful job and asking Cliff some very, very good questions. It was a great watch, and if you haven't seen it already, we highly recommend that you do. We will provide the link for your reference. Secondly, I just wanted to say that I apologize for causing the timeline trauma when I shared the contents of that interview. But if for some reason you didn't see all of that chaos, here's a quick rundown of what we learned. Cliff did mention that Cage Mac got sent to the distant past and not the far future like many of us believed. And also, according to Cliff, Legendary is still actively shopping the show. He also said that Legendary believes that there is interest, but he is unaware in what capacity that interest is. With all this new information, there's obviously a ton of possibilities for comic parallels and new storylines, especially for future Tiff in a potential season 2, but we will try and leave most of that for our theories episode, as this episode is focused on Tiff and what we know as canon. So, yeah, that's it for the news.
All right, so that is a little bit of Paper Girls news for you. Today, we have here only 4 people. The podcast is going to have different people on every time, just because not everybody can commit to doing this every week. So we have me, Nora, Shelby, Tavia, and we have a new person with us today. So why don't you introduce yourself? Just give us your name, pronouns, Twitter handle, and how you got into Paper Girls. That's how we did it last time.
Okay. Thank you everyone for having me. My name is Afyon, but everyone can call me Af. Most people do. My pronouns are she, her, and my Twitter is Paper Girls, with the 4 where the A is and a 1 where the I is.
Mm-hmm.
I got into Paper Girls. It's a little bit of a long story, but I'll try to make it short. It was my friend's birthday. It was September 2016. No, it was my friend's birthday, and I was looking for something to get her in the comics section because I usually like to read comics. And I saw the Paper Girls comics. The art caught my eye. I know we don't like Stranger Things comparisons. I don't like them either, but it was 2016. And so I saw 4 kids on bikes. It was the 80s. I was like, she likes Stranger Things. And so I picked it up. Unfortunately, they did not have the first volume, so I got her the 2nd and 3rd. And I kind of read it to see if it would be too confusing. And I got kind of interested in it myself. And yeah.
That's so cool. We haven't had anybody on that's been a super long time fan.
Yeah.
Whoa. Old, ancient now. But I bounce back and forth with my interests. So I wouldn't say I've been in the depths of the fandom for...
It's kind of impossible to be in the depths of a fandom for 6 years. But that is very cool.
Depths of no. Yeah, that's super cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we're recording this on a Saturday. Monday is Tiff's birthday. We'll be posting this on Tuesday, so that the episode is going to be Tiff Tuesday. So that's very exciting. It's very fun.
Happy birthday, Tiff.
Happy birthday, Tiff. It's not her birthday yet, but we're celebrating. So this is a Tiff breakdown episode, and some of us have some notes, and all of us have ideas. It's going to be really fun. Yeah.
My brain is ready.
Okay.
I'm ready.
Quick note from Nora about 20 minutes before this episode is going to come out. Just after editing, I feel like I have to put a little preface. We did not really have time to adequately prepare for this, so we just sort of went in chronological order throughout the series and just talked. It's definitely not the best, not not the best organized, not the most coherent, but we had a lot of fun, and we hope that people will enjoy it and have fun listening to us. And we'll be better prepared next time. But just so you know, we start the podcast like pretty prepared, and we get more and more tired and less prepared as the episode goes on. We recorded this over 2 hours straight, and it ended up being edited down to like 1 hour, but still, keep that in mind. And also keep in mind that I am also more and more exhausted the more that I edited this. So the quality just gradually decreases. I don't know, we were sort of thinking of starting with the character description, but I think that I might want to skip that and just do the show introduction. Does anybody have any opinions on that?
I don't care.
Okay. So Tiff's character introduction, I think something that's done really well in episode 1 is the introduction of all the characters, that first little like clip where they're all introduced. And I think Tiff's is really interesting, more so than I think some of the others. I don't know. Does anybody have any thoughts they want to start with?
About the scene where she's introduced?
Yeah. So it's like, her mom wakes her up.
Mm-hmm.
It's time to join the rat race. And she like pulls her pillow over. I think given how detail oriented the rest of the characters' scenes are, that almost feels a little out of character for Tiff, which I find really interesting to think about.
Yeah, because, I mean, she really gives off that, like, she's kind of prepared.
Yeah.
So it kind of just, like, it is pretty out of character. But you do, like, in her room itself, you do see a lot of her, like,
yes,
inner
absolutely.
personality with her likes and her interests.
And she's... The thing I think of is, obviously, I think it's really interesting in that introduction scene that we see her mom. That's the only time we see her mom, which...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they added that so that we can also get a glimpse of her relationship with her mom, because then we don't get to like see any interaction in the season. So like when like older Tiff is kind of like basically being kind of negative, it's kind of hard to like understand, because we see like, I think she's even the only one whose mom wakes her up. Like Erin wakes up with an alarm. That clearly got up by herself. Yeah. And I don't know what happened with KJ, but I'm assuming I feel like part of it is her mom is in her scrubs, and from the comics, her mom's a doctor.
Yeah.
So I feel like her mom was probably on her way to work when she was waking Tiff as well. And so I'm pushing a little idea. Maybe that's also why Tiff took this job, to like be able to be up around the same time as her mom as
That's
well.
so interesting.
I love that. I never thought of that.
That also makes a lot of sense.
I think, to me, I mean, first, I think it's important to establish the fact that her mom's a nurse. She's so hardworking. And the sort of time to join the rat race, she's like pushing Tiff to be the best. Now I'm getting into some sort of those metaphors. Pushing her to be the best, which ties into some ideas of Black excellence that I know Af has talked a lot about, and we'll totally get into later. And it's sort of the idea of like her mother is pushing her out of love, which ties into a lot of the relationship with her mother that we see a lot when older Tiff is introduced. So that's sort of my ideas of the significance of that first scene. Does anybody, Tavia, do you have anything to add?
Not really. I will add more though.
Yeah. Okay. I feel like, first of all, I just want to say, I think in the same way that Tiff's like very first introduction was very different to the other characters, I think all of them got really, really strong characterization within the first episode. We see that Erin is like feels very responsible for her family. We see that KJ has this resentment towards her family. We see Max whole everything. But Tiff, we aren't really given explicitly as much. There's that whole thing of like her being smart and having all these super high expectations of herself that we don't really get into in the first episode, which I think is really, really interesting. And I think, first of all, just sort of shows how great the writing is that they can do that and introduce her character so subtly. But it's also, it also made me think of like the specifics of why you would introduce a Black character like that, because I think there's a lot of stereotypes you can get into. And I can see in so many different parts of the first episode that they seem to have worked really hard to try to avoid those. And I think if they acknowledged how smart she was in the very beginning, I think it might unfortunately taint the audience's perspective of her based on some of the sort of like smart Black girl, acting white. I don't know why I'm doing air quotes. Nobody can see me. And so I think that's something that really resonated with me. And it's also like unfortunate that maybe they had to do that and work so hard to do that.
Yeah, it is incredibly subtle, and like rewatching it so many times, you're able to pick up on like the small hints of her genius at work, or just like her elevated like brain in comparison to all the other girls. But it does take a rewatch for that to happen. Because I didn't pick up on it immediately, and I think I stated previously that I was reading the comic, watching the show at the same time, so I was aware that she was the smartest of the group, but I still, hadn't finished the comics at that time.
Yeah, I did a little working list of sort of the hints of how smart she is. The fact that she was an astronaut as a kid, her very specific knowledge on her walkie-talkies. She has this whole thing. She has this whole thing about like, what if it's the Soviets that are attacking us?
Yeah, understanding the nuclear attack procedures. And only a nerd would know those kind of things.
Knowing the name of like the medical name for sleepwalking, which also might have to do with her mother, but still.
Right.
And then just the fact that she's so curious and knowledgeable. She's so curious about the device that Naldo gives her and the Alexa in Aaron's house. And she's so observant. When they go to Mac's house, I can't remember, I think it's KJ that's like, where were all the people out there? And Tiff is the one to point out there weren't any cars either. And all of them were too sort of freaked out to look at that. And then she even, when they get to Aaron's house, she immediately looks at the fridge and tries to figure out what's going on. And she immediately pieces together, that's Aaron. This is Aaron.
I think it's also a good way of portraying I don't want to get into gifted child discourse, but I think it's like a good way of portraying like gifted kids. Because I feel like a lot of like TV shows and movies also, they just like they don't typically act the way a gifted child would.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, like they just like are kind of a little bit like a walking calculator. And I feel like it's a little more nuanced and layered than that. And I think Tiff, the way they characterized her is like more nuanced, because it's like she's very observant in like her surroundings and like being able to like apply what she knows.
One of my favorite things is first of all, she's not ashamed of her knowledge. We see this with Tiff when with older Tiff when she like goes into all this like complex mathematics when talking about like the explanation for time travel. But we also see this in normal Tiff. When she says that scientific name for sleepwalking, Mac's like, what? and Tiff is like, it's sleepwalking. Like she doesn't feel embarrassed or, no matter what other people say, she's proud of being, who she is. And something that I specifically wrote down is she doesn't sugarcoat anything. She doesn't sugarcoat the truth about most things, and she doesn't sugarcoat herself. She doesn't try to make herself more palatable to other people. When we first see her interact with Aaron, she's smart. She goes into that situation in a way that is going to help both of them. But the way she talks to Aaron's like, I had that handled. And Tiff is saying, like, did you really want him to, like, bash your head in? Like, come on. So she's clearly, like, compassionate and she cares. But she's not necessarily, there's a difference between, like, compassionate and, like, doing good things and nice. She's not, like, nice. She's kind.
She's like, it's very clear that she's super like comfortable with how she is and how she thinks. She often like shares that with people because she's just very, very like blunt, but also just unapologetically herself, and it shows through the whole like season of the show. And I think it's really important to pick that apart because I mean her development was a little bit prolonged more than the others, but I do think that it's still like super important, and she is a really important character.
And going back to Tiff, Aaron, and the racist guy, I feel like part of that also shows that she's a bit of a strategic thinker as well. Like, out of all the girls, kind of like when Prior's brother shows up, her first instinct is always like, how can we get out of this situation safely?
I didn't write anything down about that.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and so she's like willing to hand over this device, even though she doesn't know what it is. She knows it's super important, and she knows the people who just killed Heck and Naldo want it, but she's willing to like hand it over because like she tends to like prioritize and like compartmentalize things. Like it's like this is the most important thing now, so we're just gonna handle that. And I think that also shows in how I don't want to jump the gun, but that also shows in how she like tends to handle her emotions as well. I think. Just clams up.
Yeah.
She's like super, like a lot of the stuff that like she loves picking things apart and seeing the details and things, whether it's decisions or small things like even the device or just knowledgeable about other stuff. But she seems to really enjoy that, and we see that a lot. And she's really good at keeping her cool and having like this critical thinking about everything, and she knows it.
Definitely something I was talking about a lot when we were rewatching this first episode was that Tiff very much has like a solver mindset. She's one of those people that really wants to solve any problem, and she gets so focused on solving that problem that, you know, sometimes some problems can't be solved. It's like an all or nothing sort of thing. And going with that forest scene, something that I really find interesting is when the Old Watch shows up. You know, everybody's super suspicious of Heck and Naldo at that point. But Aaron, KJ, and Mac all run away from both the Old Watch and Heck and Naldo. However, Tiff follows Naldo, I believe it is, who is the one who doesn't get shot immediately. So she separates herself from the group because to follow Naldo. To me, that is like she's seeking answers. She wants to know what's going on, and she can learn that from him. Which actually, I think that brings me a little bit to episode 2 of the very beginning when Mac and Tiff are sort of like squabbling a little bit, and everybody else is sort of freaking out. But Mac and Tiff are squabbling of Mac saying like, "What if we're dead?"
Right.
And Tiff immediately like latches on to the idea of time travel because she knows they know something really weird is happening. But to her, time travel is like the more logical explanation. It's the more scientific explanation for sure. She says, if we're dead, then we're in hell. That's a situation that very much does not make any sense. And she immediately latches on to the most logical situation. And then, you know, Aaron goes up and the girls are getting ready for bed. They have that whole conversation. Well, Mac isn't there. Tiff and KJ and Aaron all have this conversation, which I think those conversations are so interesting. I love those types of conversations because I think they're a really shocking and important part of the show that like those goofy scenes like this scene and the period scene very much remind you that these are children. And so it seems like a very strange reaction to be having, to just like suddenly be able to like giggle, but they're 12, like.
And
it's good to see them all have this, like they find some sort of peace.
But something that resonated with me a lot was when they're talking about their pets, and she talks about her hamster. She says Weird Al is dead, and she almost checks out in that moment, which like Lee and I were talking about at that time, sort of just like, you know, she was running with Naldo. Naldo gets shot. She's like right next to him. She almost gets shot. And then she has to watch him die right in front of her. You know, and in the moments after that, I guess we're going sort of back to episode 1. In the moments after that, she doesn't really talk very much until that big crisis of the prioress's brother comes. She's sort of like in shock because of that, definitely in that moment. But the whole Weird Al is dead thing, it turns into like a funny moment, but it very much, I felt like I had a peek into her mind of like, wow, it's like dealing with the idea of death and mortality is like fucking intense. Again, she's 12 years old. That whole scene is like serves as a reminder of that in many different ways.
She's still like you can see that she still kind of prioritizes certain emotions, kind of keeps certain ones to herself. But like I feel like seeing her in like the cafe and stuff, that's her actually like feeling her feelings finally and getting it out and yelling, and it's a big moment because you see that she's sort of holding a lot back, especially in the
tech store
phone place.
I love in the tech store we start to see much more of that criticalness of other people,
right,
and these high expectations of herself. Like she can't imagine the idea that her future self wouldn't be somebody that could help them.
Yeah. Well, I have in my notes that she's already, she's so focused on finding her future self even so early on.
Mhm.
Like they just got there and she's already, saying that she's talking so highly about her future self and has this pre-existing idea that her future self is everything that she wanted to be. And
Yeah.
she even says like, we have to find my future self. She'll know what to do.
Mhm.
Because in her mind, there is no way that she wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting contrast between Aaron and Tiff in those moments because I think if the roles were reversed and we had seen future Tiff and like Tiff's sort of disillusionment with not being who she wanted to be, I think Aaron would immediately reconsider like, oh my gosh, am I a failure too? But Tiff isn't even affected by that idea.
Yeah, she doesn't even explore the possibility of being a failure.
Yeah, and obviously I think that whole crazy freak out when the thing fritzes is really interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting also how her first reaction after seeing it mess up is like, I was on the track for MIT. It's like, you're 12, first of all. Secondly, there's so much else going on.
From her mom too.
Mm-hmm.
I think with her mom, I don't even think she really realizes it until older Tiff is saying all that stuff, and I still think that she doesn't realize it. But I feel like the whole perfectionist in her is brought on a lot by her mom because of this whole thing of her having to have success, and she does not realize it. She's pretty much blind to it. She's a kid. I mean, of course she's gonna be.
She immediately, whenever something doesn't go her way, she immediately blames somebody else, even if it was her doing. Like, for example, when they leave Storm out of the house, she forgets the device. She's like, none of you grabbed it, and KJ is like, you mean you forgot it? Like, that was clearly she was the one who cared about that device. She should have grabbed it. Which that moment to me is really interesting. Yeah,
it's just it's such a 12-year-old thing to say, but also it's such an only child thing to say too.
Yes.
I would probably have said something like that, oh, no one else was looking for it. Meanwhile, it's essentially her responsibility, kind of, because she's the one who's the most convinced that it's their way home.
There's definitely a parallel between Tiff's experience as an only child and KJ's experience as an only child, because Tiff clearly at least feels very supported, and in a lot of ways is more supported than KJ is. Their relationships with their mother are similar in a lot of ways, as where they're pushing them to be a person that maybe they aren't. It's just Tiff doesn't even consider the idea of being someone other than what her mother wants. Yeah.
No, they have a lot of good parallels between them.
Yeah.
Right.
It's hard not to bring up KJ when you're talking about Tiff, but I feel especially what Tiff's mom wants out of her, I feel it doesn't sound like a bad thing. It's I just want you to be great and be successful. Right. Do we hop into the Black Excellence conversation? Or would it be jumping?
Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
This seems like a good time to bring that up.
I do want to reference the Teen Vogue article.
Love a reference.
It was by Vanessa Willoughby. But it basically brings up that Tiffany is her character kind of shows the trap that Black excellence can become. Because it's based in your self-worth becomes based in your productivity, which I think also ties in with the rat race thing as well, pretty well. I feel Tiffany feels once she gets all these accolades, she'll be somebody in a sense.
Yeah.
But it all seems good on paper. It's okay, you work really hard, you become valedictorian, you go to MIT, and then you have to be the best in your MIT engineering program, and you have to be the best in your job. And it's just these things never end, and you're not really valued as a person. You're just valued for what you can do for people. I feel is what a 12-year-old doesn't understand that a 23-year-old would. I already know engineering is very white and male major, so I can't imagine what it was in the 90s in MIT. But it's I feel when you're Black and then a woman, you're also holding yourself to really, really high standards. So it's you also feel you can't mess up. And I feel part of her being no one brought the device, even though it's her fault, is just trying to shift any possible thing. She cannot be seen in her own head as anything less than perfect.
Another moment just to finish up episode 2, another moment that's really interesting is Max sort of lashes out at all of them. Everybody in that at that point, sort of in the entire second episode, is being quite unfair to everybody else. Something that really interested me was Mac literally says, she says, like, I have that paper route. I need the money for I need lunch money, not to go shopping Inspector fucking Gadget or something like that. And Tiff almost like looks remorseful at that in a way that I think is really interesting.
I feel like because the whole scene is so interesting. I'm not trying to talk about Mac in the scene, but I feel like the moment Mac gets upset is when they're all talking about the concert, and it's something they can all relate to, but Mac can't. And so, like, Tiff then makes the comment, like, yeah, Mac's brother's probably the one in jail. And it's like, she's just, like, kind of paralleling what Mac already said about KJ, but she doesn't really seem to understand the class implications to saying something like that, especially to, like, Mac.
And obviously,
she apologizes really quickly, though. Like, I don't know if it's that genuine of an apology, but she's just kind of like, okay, sorry, but, like, Mac isn't done because they really pissed her off this time.
Yeah.
Right.
I just noticed that. I was like, because it's like you would think Tiff would be a more confrontational person, but she kind of isn't, honestly, which I think is interesting.
I mean,
and I feel like she also apologized that Mac wouldn't leave, which did not end up working out in her favor.
Yeah, that sort of ties into the idea that she's not, like, nice, but she's definitely not a confrontational person. In like conflict scenarios, her aim is always to de-escalate. With that with that racist guy at the beginning, with the prioress's brother, it's always like the first priority is safety. I wish I would have been paying more attention with when they finally explain things to Larry.
The fire pit scene?
Yeah.
You're talking about the scene.
The kitchen scene and the fire pit scene.
Yeah.
I wish I had more to say about that because I don't remember them very well. But I do remember that Tiff doesn't really take the lead in those scenarios. It's more so older Aaron and KJ, which is a whole other thing to talk about later. But she's definitely, like, sort of, I don't know, that's one thing. I'm definitely editing that out because I don't have it.
You're tied in with de-escalation.
Yeah. What's the fire pit scene exactly? He's explaining the time war.
Yeah, I can talk more about that. I have some notes on that.
Go.
So when they're all around the fire and Larry's kind of explaining not just the STF, but, like, the time war in general, Tiffany, they're all asking questions, but Tiffany's kind of the one who takes the lead and asks, like, the most prevalent question. She asks, like, how do you guys fix things without disrupting everything that comes after? And even Larry says, this is a lot of information. It's, hard to follow. And she says, no, it's not. I'm following.
I think that scene definitely contributes to the whole thing with Larry in episode 4, where he, like, has this weird realization that, oh my God, like, she's a 12-year-old kid. Because I feel like that's probably something she encounters a lot, is unfortunately people treat her as older than they should.
Because of her intelligence, yeah.
I would say she's definitely intelligent, but she's not mature. There's a certain amount of, like, emotional maturity and intelligence that she lacks.
I feel like she forces herself to, like, grow up a lot more than she should, and that includes with, like, maturity and stuff, but she's still a kid.
Yeah.
And I feel like when she catches herself being a kid, she kind of just... I think there's a lot of pressure on her to grow up really fast because she's smart, but...
Like, the Vogue article, to throw it in here, as we were also kind of mentions that as well, and also points to, like, a lot of, like, young Black girls are treated as older than they are because they're viewed as being more mature.
Yeah.
Even though, like, Tiff, like, from what we know and we see of her, she really is just, like, 12. But because she's, like, so smart and then she's already, like, Black, everyone's just like, okay, yes. Like, she has to know what she's doing and talking about. She doesn't know more than the other girls, as much as she would hate for someone to say that.
Yeah, there's definitely pressure on her. She convinces Larry and Aaron to have them go to 1988 so that they can save Heckenaldo. Once again, that sort of problem solver. She's trying to find a solution that works for everybody.
Right. She doesn't want to just send them home. She wants to fix everything, if possible.
And something something we were wondering was like, there definitely seems to be a deleted scene in episode 4 where KJ is actively leaving and taking that motorbike. Because when Larry and Tiff talk at the very beginning, Larry's like, your friend left, right? And Tiff says, I tried to stop her. And there's actually one of the audition scripts was a scene where KJ is leaving and Tiff and Aaron are trying to stop her. And so that is something to consider with Tiff's whole thing in that episode. Tiff, during the argument with Mac, is very focused on like, we should stick together. That's the safest thing. And I think in some ways her actions in episode 4, maybe trying to discourage KJ would contradict that, but in some ways it also...
She can't really do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
So if she can keep the rest of them together, at least there's that.
Yeah, once again, that feeling of responsibility for everybody's safety. I think I'm going to skip over the whole Aaron-Larry thing, other than the fact that they see Larry die, and that's really awful.
Well, we should talk about the backpack, I feel like.
No, I'm going to skip until that point. That's what I was going to do.
Okay, good.
Definitely, once again, solving, now she's like, we're alone. We have to figure this out. We have to know things. So she risks her life.
Not only are they alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only are they alone, but she's already got some sort of knowledge of the almanac and what it entails. So she knows that that's incredibly important to get them back.
That's one of the points where she starts to like abandon that idea of like prioritizing her and everybody else's safety to a certain degree. Like with all this stuff going on, all of them just sort of like develop a reckless attitude. We see that a lot in episode 8.
When she went back for the almanac, I feel like that was more about like, I feel because she implies that she's trying to get involved in the Time War.
Yeah.
In some way,
right.
Which really pisses off KJ.
Yes. We can go to that now.
Yeah, that's a good segue.
Definitely. I think I've thought about that scene a lot. On Tiff's side, it's definitely like, she wants to get involved. She wants to maybe save Heck and Naldo. Again, connected to the whole watching somebody die is really fucking traumatic. KJ says the words, I'm tired of watching people die. Which to me, I almost feel like Tiff should agree with that. She was right there when Naldo died.
I feel like, yeah, she's just like in solution.
Yeah, and it's also like the solver in her. She wants to solve this problem, even though he's already dead. It's like causing her so much emotional turmoil, and maybe that's part of what she wants to solve. But even if she did go and save Naldo's life, that is still going to be a really difficult thing that she saw, and it's probably going to affect her for the rest of her life. That's one of those problems that cannot be solved. And then we get to KJ yelling at her. KJ brings up the fact that, Larry lied to us. And Tiff is like, no, he wouldn't have done that.
Yeah. She has an inherent trust in adults.
Exactly.
And she really the other three.
I think something Lee and Shelby and I were talking a lot when we were rewatching the show was that idea. Just because like Mac, Aaron, and KJ all have experience with adults in their life that fail them. And Tiff doesn't really have as much of that experience. And so she's a lot more trusting. He's another person that recognizes how smart she is, and that feels really good.
Yeah. Well, she said it. She said that she felt that they were chosen.
He definitely appealed to her ego in that moment. Very dangerously. Tell like a 12-year-old.
Very dangerously.
Yeah.
Indeed.
If someone told 12-year-old I was chosen, I'd be like, yeah, I'm not listening to you.
Yeah, bitch, I'm chosen. I know.
I feel like I was about to skip over the period. Do we want to skip over that?
You can't do that. You can't do that. I only have like one thing to say about the period scene.
Yeah, I feel like
just that all it shows is that Tiff kind of like takes the lead. She like reads off the instructions and like talks about the side effects. I don't know. That's just such a smart little nerd thing to do.
And once again, she doesn't sugarcoat it. Like clearly, it's not a very emotionally intelligent thing to be saying. Oh my God, my mom's friend's leg fell off when she got toxic shock syndrome. That's not a very sensitive thing to say when Erin's freaking out.
Yeah, and she goes fever, vomiting, diarrhea, rash.
Smooth it over by saying, "Oh, well, she's still alive.
Still alive.
She just doesn't have a leg."
Yeah.
So you can cut to the punch.
Yeah.
Which is where Tiff decides that she's
definitely, once again, it's definitely like the whole idea of like feeling like she is and even like has to be smarter than the rest of them. It's it ties into the whole thing of like compartmentalizing her emotions, because the rest of them, you know, their emotions are driving their decisions. Tiff says, "You guys are all stupid, helpless little children."
Yeah.
And she does not include herself in that assessment.
Because she's not. In her mind, she's definitely not a stupid, helpless child. Yeah.
And once again, that sort of ties into the whole everything with
the whole everything.
the whole everything.
Yeah, I'm gonna quote you on that.
Okay, now we're just gonna we're kind of just gonna have to wing it a little bit, because none of us took any notes on on episode 7 or 8. So that's really fun.
6.
We are. You're right. So right.
6.
You have notes on episode
Hold on
6.
now.
Go.
I do. Episode 6 was really kind of where her arc really begins.
Woo.
I know we talked about like how everybody's arc is kind of more, you know, spread out throughout the season, but hers is really 6 through 8. So we do get to see them go and meet Tiff, and while Tiff is obviously surprised about how her older self turned out, because she does know at this point that future her runs an institute.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And she knows in some way, shape, or form that all of her success comes true. So she doesn't know the intricacies of adults Tiff's experience just yet, but yeah, go ahead.
That definitely reinforces the whole idea that like her mindset and the path she's on is correct.
Yeah, and so they're confronting Larry. You know, I think it's a direct contradiction to episode 3, where Larry is confronting Tiff and makes Tiff cry. But in episode 6, I think this is like probably my favorite Tiff scene, and probably like Cameron's best acting in the show, when she's explaining to Larry what he did, you know, leaving them all there in an unknown time to die. A woman died, he died. She's the one in the driver's seat there, and Larry's the one on the verge of tears.
Yeah.
I just think that's really fun and interesting. That's all I have for episode 6.
Yeah, because that's about it. So definitely, I think it's really interesting. Once again, we sort of see that older Tiff is not very sensitive of Tiff's feelings. She definitely tries to be, which shows some growth. But the moment she gets frustrated, she says, "You're adopted." And you can see, I'll skip ahead for just a second. You can see when they get back that she's like, you know, younger Tiff is like really angry, and older Tiff has to like actually verbalize to herself, like, you know, the way your anger is valid, like it makes sense. It's a reasonable reaction. It's sort of a good segue into the idea that I don't think Tiff changed as much as she thinks she did from that realization. Because obviously to her it's like a super big deal. To her, it feels like suddenly all these things that she grew up like not acknowledging as the truth are like suddenly untrue. But there's definitely still a lot of that sticks with her in a way that I don't think she recognizes.
Just the fact that in the cafe, there's a specific mug that younger Tiff is drinking, and it has the words, "I don't know, I don't care, and it doesn't make any difference."
Yeah, so younger Tiff is like, she said, "That's kind of a weird way to feel about things." And older Tiff says, "What if I told you that's a perfectly normal way to feel about things?" She says there's no one way to feel about things. But I think there's a lot of hypocrisy coming from older Tiff, from her, like, you know, overestimation of how much she's grown and changed and unlearned ideas from her childhood. That's really interesting, because she says all these things, like, you know, there's no right way to feel in, you know, reaction to a situation, talking about how she felt like rushed to grow up, and then she felt so free being able to have fun as an adult. And yet she like tries to tell Tiff how to feel. She's like, "I'm you, so I know what you're going through, and here's how you should feel." She's like, ultimately, this is for the best. And Tiff doesn't feel that way. And I think that's part of the reason she gets so defensive. And at the same time, this is, you know, relating back to the Black excellence thing. It sort of goes along with the idea of having to grow up too fast, because she's like, if I tell you this now, then you'll be able to speed run it. You'll be able to get over it quicker than I did. And it's sort of like, why not just,
yeah,
you know,
that's
what,
not
like,
how that works at all.
It's not how it works. And also, like, you were just talking about how rushing herself through that sort of feeds into that Black excellence loop of, like, you know, you can do better than I did. If you get over this, then you can be the best later.
Yeah.
You won't have to waste your time with you won't have to waste your time with MIT. You'll just be the best, you know.
Right. I think it's kind of naive of adult Tiff to say something like that, though. As if, like, learning that information in that timeline for adult Tiff as if learning that information wasn't a very emotional experience for her, which I'm sure it was. And that's why she would want to bypass it if possible. I just feel like that's a very interesting take.
I
So,
also think part of it is the way Tiff and Aaron both interact with their past and I guess technically present selves, like kind of parallels. Like Aaron seems to see 2019 Aaron as like kind of separate from her, but both Tiffs refer to themselves as kind of like a we. So they see each other as like an extension of each other. So whenever one's not doing what they think they should be doing, I feel like they haven't realized yet like there's like a difference between like the current ages they're at. Like I feel like even like 99 Tiff is looking at her younger self as someone a little older and wiser when all that she is really just smarter. And I don't want to say she isn't smarter than the other girls. I think she thinks differently than the other girls in a way that is more like viewed as being smarter.
that's sort of all I have to say. Is there anything else
That's
you
all I
want to
have.
talk about?
Okay, so we asked everyone on Twitter to ask us some questions for the episode. So I've got a couple in front of me. I'm just going to read off and everybody can kind of answer. Joe is asking, for the Tiff episode, what are your favorite Tiff lines, comic or show?
Barring What's the Internet, because I think that's objectively one of the best ones. I think other than that, let's come back to me. I'll think about it.
Come back
Her,
to you?
like-
Okay.
Her like yell, the like no shit Sherlock. That's funny to me. I don't know, that made me giggle.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let me
Just-
think. I
Yeah.
I to not try to take away from the silly, I'm gonna try and get a serious quote in here.
Yeah.
I talked about it earlier, but at the fire pit talk in episode 3, when she says no, it's not, I'm following. I don't know. I just love the idea of her reinforcing her intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess mine from the show. There's a couple of the show, but I also really like the way the line delivery of like it's the Russians. Like it's not even a question.
Soviets.
Yeah.
Sending everyone into panic casually. I will have to think on the comic.
Yeah.
I like the I swear to God on the Holy Bible, I will shoot your pet in the neck.
Oh no, I love
Yes,
that one.
yes.
Yeah,
Everything
that's
about her and the gun.
that's the one.
I love
That's
it.
the one.
Just Tiff and the gun. Everything about it.
Yeah. Give Tiff a gun in a season 2, please.
Please.
Tiff the gun.
I gotta pay for that.
No.
I think that makes me remember a line that I really like, which is when Heck and Naldo, they leave the thing, the like time travel capsule thing.
Oh, the capsule, okay.
And they like talk and they sound weird, and she says, "I knew it was the Soviets." It's a very Tiff line, and it's how it like, you know, sort of reinforces a lot of the stuff we were talking about with her, and it's also just like objectively very funny.
Nice. Anyways, okay. I got another question for us.
Next question. Audience participation.
This is from user Hole in the Ozone. This one's
Yeah,
interesting.
great.
I might have to actually take a minute to think about this.
Okay.
What song do each of you associate with Tiff?
Let me pull up
I'm
my
just
Spotify.
gonna go ahead and say the Whitney Houston song that they play in the show.
Honestly, yeah.
It's not
Honestly,
nice, but it's
that's
okay.
the only one I can. Yeah, it's the only one I can think of off the top of my head right now.
I mean, I have a Tiff playlist, so I'm worried.
Okay.
Like, I'm like, it should be more serious, but I
Oh,
can't.
it's a little silly. It's a little silly.
It's a little silly, yeah.
We
Like,
love silly.
I just always associate beatbox music with her, so I would have to
my
say that Blue Dabba song.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
I can see it though. I can see
Yeah,
it.
honestly, yeah.
I think something that I
Oh.
definitely associate with Tiff is Townie by Mitski. It's very much like, to me, like older Tiff, sort of like, and I think it also relates to like her whole thing with Russ, which we didn't really talk about him because I don't really want to talk about him.
He's
He's irrelevant.
inconsequential.
He's
He's
inco-
inconsequential,
yeah.
really.
He's really just like, I don't know. I feel like that sort of speaks.
He's not
for
Chris.
itself. Sort of
It
speaks
does.
He's not Chris.
Really
so-
solitary.
that whole thing.
Yeah.
Lee and Shelby and I, when we were watching that whole sequence with Russ and Tiff and younger Tiff in the car on the way to Larry's, we were just like, wow, I really don't want to talk about this in the Tiff episode, because it's just like, ugh.
Yeah,
like,
it's just so cringe.
It's sad too.
It's so sad, and then it's also like, why would you do that when your younger self's in the car?
Icky.
Yeah, I forgot his name. Like
you can
I
fix
straight
that
up forgot
later.
his name in that moment. Yeah.
I feel like it definitely shows. I feel like she lost a lot of confidence when she got expelled from MIT, and the relationship with Russ definitely shows that.
Yeah. Tavia, do you have a favorite or a song that reminds you of Tiff? Did you say one?
See, I'm trying.
Sorry to
this
put
is
you on
what
the
I've been
spot.
thinking about.
Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Trying to think. I'm just trying to, like, my brain is going blank, but I'm gonna just say Whitney too. I'm gonna say
Yeah.
yeah, because it makes sense. It makes sense a lot. I think that because it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. That scene is so great.
Another favorite Tiff quote of mine is when older Tiff, like, they're done arguing, and older Tiff, like, sort of flops onto the beanbag chair and is like, this is actually the only good song on this album. It's like,
Yeah. It's so real for that.
Yeah.
It's funny. All right, I've got
not even
go ahead.
true.
It's
yeah. I'll also defend that. Yeah. I've got one more question for us.
Uno mas.
I actually don't know how to say this person's username, but I'm gonna spell it out so that you know who says it. JINH55. They asked about if we have any theories about how the institute ended up founded.
Yeah.
Which I've never really thought about.
I mean, I sort of went into that a little bit of, like, the whole idea of, like, a time loop where younger Tiff's note in the almanac starts that, and just the fact that, like, she would have access to the information in that book probably would be a good start to that. That's sort of, I guess that's my biggest theory, I guess.
Yeah. I've seen that one around. That's the only one I guess.
I feel like that's the one that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
I feel like it would definitely be more complicated than that, but
it's definitely a simplified version.
I feel like I don't know why else they would put that in there if that wasn't if that book and that note wasn't at least related to how the institute was founded.
She does mention when, like, younger Tiff is talking to her and is basically like, so what are you doing with your life now? And she's basically like, she mentions, like, getting together with a bunch of people to create a space for those who don't fit into MIT, basically, is what I think she was saying. And so I guess that's, like, the beginnings of it. So I guess it's just, like, a bunch of people who got expelled from, like, MIT.
I guess earlier when I was talking about my theory, I thought of the idea of, like, her seeing that note and sort of changing the direction of the Quokka Institute. But maybe, I mean, she was sort of, like, even as a scientist, and even seeing how Tiff, like, immediately grabbed onto the time travel idea once it was the thing that made the most sense. Even with that, it's sort of, she is a little bit jarringly, first of all, jarringly knowledgeable about time travel. That seems, is that coincidental? I don't know. But also just, like, really not surprised that time travel exists. And so maybe she was already working on it.
Theorizing, yeah. She was already, maybe whether she knew it or not, she had kind of intrinsic theories and ideas about all of that stuff.
Like, I feel like, I think I kind of had said something about it before, but, like, I feel like also part of her not fitting in MIT is having, like, kind of, like, slightly out there theories and, like, being really creative in what she believed science could do and pushing the boundaries of what's logical.
And I mean, there's tons of scientists that, like, said things regarded. And so I think Tiff definitely as sort of as a part of that black excellence, she wants to be that significant, and so she sort of sees a pattern of, like, that's how you get there.
That's a good point.
Okay, is that it?
I think that's all the questions.
I think so.
I saw that tweet about the future of the person who asked about the future theories. They also wanted us to talk about the graduation speech. I do not have enough thoughts on that. I will totally talk about that in the episode 7 breakdown, though, for sure. Okay, so that is our Tiff episode. Last week, we sort of made the decision that the Tiff episode was going to happen, like, right in the middle while we were recording. But now we have a specific schedule of which characters are going at which times. So this week is Tiff. Next week will be Aaron. and then it will be Mac, and then KJ. So that is the plan. But thank you guys so much for listening. Like I said, next week's episode is Aaron. So if you have any questions or anything you want us to talk about to make sure that is mentioned about Aaron, email us at stonystreamspod@gmail.com or tweet us with the hashtag AskStonyStreams. If you're ever tweeting about the podcast, please either tag us or use the hashtag AskStonyStreams or the hashtag StonyStreamsPodcast, because we like seeing things. It makes us really happy.